Welcome to module 13.6, solving quadratic equation by factoring. So in this particular lecture video, I'm going to show you how to solve this thing called a quadratic equation by factoring. All right, so exactly what is a quadratic equation? Quadratic equation can be written in the form of ax squared plus bx plus c equal to 0, where a, b, and c are real numbers. So if you just kind of ignore equal to 0 part, the ax squared plus bx plus c, this left side is actually the standard form for a trinomial. So basically what it's trying to say is, it does not have to be a trinomial on the left side, but what it's trying to say is a quadratic equation is an equation where the variable x is to the second power. Okay, so the a, b, and c are coefficient and constant term. So as long as I have an equation that consists of variable raising to the second power, that's called the quadratic equation. So if I have an x squared minus 4, okay, this is a difference of square expression, but once I set it equal to 0, then that becomes a quadratic equation. All right, so the difference between a linear equation versus a quadratic. Linear equation is where the variable x is to the first power in an equation. So quadratic equation excuse me. Quadratic equation is where the variable x is to the second power, okay, in an equation. All right, so that's the difference between the two. Now there are 5 different techniques on how to solve quadratic equation. The technique by factoring is our very first one. Okay, we will introduce another 3 techniques in module 16. All right, the way how we solve it, okay, before we can even solve it by factoring, we need to understand this thing called the zero factor property. Zero factor property says if the product of 2 or more factors is 0, then at least one of the factors must be 0. Okay, that doesn't really say a whole lot, so let me kind of explain to you this way. So let me just use this standard form for quadratic equation. So if I have a quadratic equation, okay, what I want to do is make sure all my terms is on the same side. The other side got to equal to 0. All right, so once I got all my terms on one side, then what I can do is factor them. Factor my polynomial. Let me just call them A, B, C, and D. Okay, so let's say I got 4 different terms here. All right, so once I factor them, I will set them equal to 0. So by the zero factor property, it says, find me a number for x where I times by a plus a b, this whole thing will equal to 0. Because 0 times anything still equal to 0. All right, in the same token, find me a number for x where I will times by c plus a d, where this is also going to be 0, because 0 times anything is still equal to 0. That's what zero factor property says. So that means we're going to use the concept of setting my factor equal to 0 in order for me to solve for x. Because that x will, because that particular number for x, which is my solution, times a plus b will make this whole thing equal to 0. Because 0 times anything is still equal to 0. So that's what the zero factor property is saying. Find a number for x, okay, where it times the coefficient a plus a b, where that whole thing becomes 0. So 0 times whatever is right next to it will still equivalent to 0. All right. Very, very, very nifty little concept. Now let's take a look at the algorithms, okay? The steps on how to solve quadratic equation. It's the same first 3 steps as solving linear equation. Got to identify terms, Gonna multiply over through our distribution. If I see parentheses, combine like term on each side, okay, if I can, then what we're gonna do is move every term to one side, and we will let the other side equal to 0. So this particular step is different compared to linear equation, because linear equation is having variable term on one side, everybody else on the other side. Quadratic is where we have to move every term to the same side, and the other side got to equal to 0. Then we will combine like term again if we need it. Step number 6, we will factor our polynomial, set each factor equal to 0 like I wrote up here. Then we will solve for the variable. So basically the idea is, even though I'm starting off with x to the second power, by factoring, which is also another way of saying by division, we will knock the exponent 2 down to a linear level. And then we can solve these linear equations accordingly to find our x. Okay, so that's basically the idea. Having x squared start out with, factor them, make them all become x to the first power, so we can set each factor equal to 0. All right, so let's check it out. Let's do this, okay? So these problems are split into 2 different steps. The very first step is using the standard form of the given quadratic equation. Factor the left-hand side of the equation into 2 linear factors. Step number 2 is actually solving the quadratic equation by factoring. So basically, the step number 1 want me to write them, okay, as a linear factor. So that's actually step 1 through 6, okay? Step 1 through 6. And then step number 2 here is our last 2 steps. So right now, all the terms, I got 3 terms here on the left, a 0 on the other side. So none of the 3 terms here has parentheses, so there's no need for distribution or multiplying. There's no like term to combine on the left side. And they already moved everybody to the same side already. All right, so there's no step number 5, and there's no like term to combine. So step number 6, let's factor this. So once everybody's on the same side, we can factor. So for 9x squared, I'm thinking this is a trinomial, so I'm thinking 3x and 3x. For 16, I'm thinking about 4 and 4. So my outer is 12, my inner is 12. So 12 and 12 combined will be 24 in the middle. So this is actually a perfect square binomial, because these 2 parentheses are going to have exactly the same thing. Since the last sign is positive, I must add my in and outer. Since my 24 in the middle is positive, both of these got to be positive. So now what I will do, once I factor them, this is my answer for step number 1. Now I will solve for the quadratic equation. So the next step is set each factor that containing the variable x equal to 0. So this is one factor, set equal to 0. Find the other factor, 3x plus 4, set equal to 0. And we will solve these 2 linear equations. So move the positive 4 over. So that gives me 3x equal to negative 4. All right, divide both sides by coefficient 3. My answer, x equal to negative 4 over 3. So as you can see, both of these answers are exactly the same. So what is my answer? My answer is only negative 4 over 3. Okay, so normally when we solve quadratic equation, and we know we are solving quadratic equation because my equation has x squared, the degree of the polynomial in my equation tells me I will have at most 2 answers. Quadratic equation has at most 2 solutions. At most 2 solutions. So that means I can have 2 answers, 1 answer, or I can have no answers. So since these two answers are exactly the same, I only have one solution, which is negative 4 over 3. I have at most two solutions. Just like linear equation, when we normally solve linear equation, I always get one answer. It's actually at most one answer because there will be times where I get no solution. As a matter of fact, some linear equations we saw back in module 9 actually have infinite number of solutions as well. But as far as quadratic concerned, quadratic equation will only have at most two solutions. Okay? All right, let's try another one. All right, here I got 4 different terms. None of the 4 terms has parentheses, so there's no distribution. Step number 3, combine like term on each side. These left side, these 3 terms on the left is not like terms. Okay, so there's no step number 3. Step number 4, let's move everybody to the same side. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to move my positive 4 to the left side. Why? Because I want to keep my leading term positive as much as I can. So when I factor, it's a lot easier. So sometimes I do this real quick. I move a term and combine all at one time. The positive 4 come over, become negative 4. So that can only combine with a positive 10. So my 7x squared minus 13x stays the same. So positive 4 come over, become minus 4. So 10 minus 4 will be positive 6. The other side got nothing there, so that must be 0. All right, so I basically do 4 and 5 together. Okay, I moved it and I combined all in one step. So step number 6 is factor. For 7x squared, I'm going to use x and 7x because this is a trinomial here. So 2 parentheses. For 6, I'm going to use 2 and 3. I'm going to put 2 right here. That gives me 14 in the inner, 3 right here. Which I don't think it will work with it. 14 and 3 on the outer is not going to work. Okay, so let me think about this. Maybe I should put 3 right here, 2 right here for the 6. But that's 21 and 2 on the outer, which is not going to give me 13. So let's not use 3 and 2. Let's use 1 and 6. Because if I put 1 here, 6 here, that means my outer is 6. My inner is going to be 7. And that can give me 13 in the middle if I do what? If I add them. All right, since the last sign is positive, the choice for the sign is plus plus or minus minus. Make sure we don't make mistake here on the signs, okay? Otherwise, my answer has different sign as well. Since my middle term is negative 13, both of these parentheses got to have negative. All right, so that's the answer for step number 1 out of 2. So after I factor, then we will set each factor containing the variable x equal to 0. So I got 2 different factors here. Okay. Remember now, factor, at the end of factoring, it should always be one term here. So this one term has 2 different factors, x minus 1 and 7x minus 6. So we set each factor containing the variable x equal to 0, and we'll solve for x. So for this one on the left, I'm going to move my negative 1 over, so my x is equal to 1. The other answer, move the negative 6 over. So that gives me 7x equal to positive 6. Divide both sides by 7. My answer, x equals 6 over 7. So here are my 2 solutions. All right, let's try another one, okay? 6x squared equal to 25. So this is a quadratic equation because this equation, highest exponent is 2. So none of the 2 terms has parentheses, so there's no multiplication or distribution. Step number 3. Combine like term on each side. There's only 1 term each. So step number 4, I'm going to move my 25 over so everybody can be on the same side. So that's 64x minus 25 equal to 0. All right, there's no like term to combine, so there's no step number 5. So step number 6, let's factor this. So this is actually a difference of squares. So that should give me ax plus 5 times ax minus 5, right? Difference of squares. Because I see 2 terms, both terms are perfectly squared with a subtraction sign in the middle. So my a must be ax, my b must be 5. So once I factor, that will be the answer for step number 1. So step number 2, let's solve for this. So I got 2 different factors here. Set each factor containing the variable x equal to 0. So after a while, student can just solve for this linear equation just by looking at it, because all we're going to do is move the positive 5 over, become negative 5. And then the next step is divide both sides by 8. So that'll be negative 5 over 8. With the negative 5 over, that becomes positive 5. Then divide both sides by 8. So that'll be positive 5 over 8. Here are my 2 answers. All right, again, 3 different terms. None of the 3 terms has parentheses. Okay, no like term to combine on each side. So let's move. Step number 4, let's move our terms. I'm gonna keep the positive 21x squared positive. So 11x and positive 40 got to come over. So I should have 21x squared minus 11x minus 40 equal to 0. So this is again a trinomial, so I'm going to use 3 and 7 for my 21x squared. For 40, I'm thinking 5 and 8. 5 and 8. Let's see, I'm going to put 8 right here, 5 right here. Will it be too big? Maybe. Let's see, that's 35. 8 there is 35. 3 times 8 is 24. 24, 35 combined. Which combined here, I know my last sign is negative, so I must subtract. 35 subtract 24 will be 11 in it. Okay, so these numbers are good to go. Alright, so last sign is negative. My choice for the sign is positive and negative. And I just subtracted to get my 11. Since my middle term is negative 11, my negative sign got to give it to the bigger of the 2 inner and outer. So my outer need to be a positive 24 by 3 times positive 8. The other one is negative. Put my x in there. All right. Now step number 2, set each factor containing the variable x equal to 0. All right. Move the negative 5 over. It becomes positive 5. Divide both sides by 3, so x is equal to 5 over 3. Move this positive 8 over, that will be negative 8. Divide both sides by 7 next, that will be negative 8 over 7. All right, that's my 2 answers. All right, now this one is interesting. So I got 2 terms here. Both terms, none of the 2 terms has parentheses. And there's no like term to combine. So when it comes to factoring parts, this is not a trinomial. So how do I factor this? Well, since so remember now in 13.5 when we go through all different type of factoring, the very first thing is always looking for the greatest common factor, which I do have one between these 2 terms. I can actually factor out 4x between these 2 terms, because 4 going to 12 is 3 times. Take 1x away from 2 over, that give me 3x. 4 going to positive 16 is positive 4 times. Take the only x to the outside, no x for my 4. There you go. So this factoring problem is simply factoring out the greatest common factor. All right, so I do have 2 factors. One is 4x, the other one is 3x plus 4. So when it comes to solving the quadratic equation, where we set each factor equal to 0, we always set the factors that containing the variable equal to 0. So we set 4x equal to 0. We set 3x plus 4 equal to 0. So when we set 4x equal to 0, only thing I can do is divide both sides by 4. Therefore, my answer, 0 divided by 4 is 0. All right, move this positive 4 over, that becomes negative 4. Then divide both sides by 3, my answer, 0 and negative 4/3. All right, so very easy, very quick on how to solve quadratic equation by factoring, and we're simply following these 8 steps right here. All right, so I got one more particular problem I want to show you in this video, which is writing the equation given the roots or the solutions. So basically, problem like this is simply doing everything we just did backwards. So we just came up with two answers here, okay? So now I'm gonna give you the two answers, see if we can work our way back to the original problem up top. Okay, so that's what this is. That's what these problems is all about. So let's do a little bit of thinking. Okay, factor theorem says if x equal to c is a root or a solution of a polynomial in the form of px equal to 0, then x minus c is a factor. Okay, so if I have an answer, that means I can also write them in the factor form, okay, for my actual polynomial. So what I mean is this: y equal to 0, y equal to 3. So this is the final, this is the very last step where we get our answer. So what was the step before we get our answer? What was the step before we get our answer? We move a term to the right side, okay, and then divide both sides by the coefficient. So now we just kind of reverse everything we do. So before the answer, okay, all the terms on the one side, the other side equal to 0. All right, so this is already set. All the terms on one side, the other side equal to 0. So this y equal to 3, before I move it to the right, become positive 3, it must be on the left side. So we go ahead and move them over. So I have y minus 3 equal to 0, and y plus 1 equal to 0. All right, so before I set each factor equal to 0, let's look at this very last one. Before I set each factor equal to 0, where were they before I set them equal to 0? Well, for one term, so this 4x is one factor, only consists of one term. That was at the beginning of the parenthesis. All right, for a factor that has multiple terms were inside the parenthesis equal to 0. So that's exactly what I'm going to do. Factor that only consists of one term, okay, should be at the very beginning. Factors that has multiple terms should be inside the parenthesis. So that would be y times y minus 3 times y plus 1 inside equal to 0. So these were the factor form before I set each factor equal to 0. All right, so we normally get to the factor form by factoring. So opposite factoring is multiplying. So now we're just going to multiply this whole thing back out, and that will give me my original polynomial equation. So since I got three things here need to be multiplied, I'm going to do my FOIL method of these two parentheses. Okay. So FOIL method says the first thing I do, y times y is y squared. The last thing I do is negative 3 times positive 1, which is negative 3. All right, remember, FOIL method is a shortcut. We're supposed to do this just by looking at it. So here we go. The middle term comes from the inner and the outer combined. My outer is positive 1, y. My inner is negative 3. So what's positive 1 and negative 3 combined, which is negative 2y. So these three terms, after they multiply, they will have to be distributed by the y that's in the front. So now use positive y to distribute. My final answer, the actual polynomial equation should be y to the third minus 2y squared minus 3y equal to 0. So that's my answer right here. All right. So in this lecture video, we talk about how to how to solve quadratic equation by factoring. And now we actually do it backwards, which give you the answers and then rewrite them in factor form where we will multiply them out to find out what was the original polynomial equation. All right, that will conclude this lecture video on solving quadratic equation by factoring. Thank you for watching.